The mahogany doors of the Manhattan family court didn't just open, they were practically blown off their hinges by an ego the size of a skyscraper. In walked Silas Sterling, a man who thought he owned the world, gripping the hand of his 24-year-old mistress, Tiffany, who was dressed more for a red carpet than a divorce hearing. Silas was laughing, already celebrating a victory he hadn't won yet. He looked at his wife of 30 years, sitting alone in the corner, and saw nothing but a ghost. But he forgot one thing. Ghosts are the ones who know where the bodies are buried. And in 10 minutes, that quiet woman in the gray cardigan wouldn't just take his money, she was going to take his name. You think you know how this ends? You have no idea. The air inside the courtroom of the Honorable Judge Harrison Blackwood was stale, smelling of floor wax and the nervous sweat of ruined fortunes. But Silas Sterling didn't smell the desperation. He smelled only his own bespoke cologne, a scent called Imperial that retailed for $600 an ounce. Silas adjusted the cuffs of his navy Brioni suit. He was 58, silver-haired, tanned from a week in street barts, and possessed the kind of teeth that were too white to be found in nature. He didn't sit. He sprawled. He checked his Patek Philippe watch, making a show of being bored. "Arthur," Silas boomed, his voice echoing disrespectfully off the high ceilings. "How long is this going to take? Tiffany has a fitting at Vera Wang at 2. We're on a schedule." Arthur Pendleton, Silas's lawyer, a man known in legal circles as the Mako for his tendency to chew up opposing counsel, sighed, tapping a gold pen against his yellow legal pad. "It will take as long as it takes for them to sign the surrender, Silas. Keep your voice down. Judge Blackwood is a stickler for decorum." Silas snorted, leaning back and draping an arm around the back of the bench, his fingers brushing against the bare shoulder of Tiffany Dubois. Tiffany was a vision of chaotic luxury. She was wearing a canary yellow dress that was tight enough to cut off circulation, coupled with a hat that looked like a satellite dish made of feathers. She was scrolling through Instagram on her phone, her acrylic nails clicking loudly against the screen. "Babe," Tiffany whispered, popping a piece of gum. "Are we getting the beach house? You promised I could redecorate the beach house. The beige is so depressing." "You're getting the beach house, the penthouse, and the Aspen Lodge," Silas assured her, loud enough for the entire room to hear. He cast a sneering glance across the aisle. "It's not like she uses them." Across the aisle sat Eleanor. If Silas was a peacock, Eleanor Sterling was a shadow. She wore a charcoal gray suit that was at least 5 years old, sensible black heels, and no jewelry, other than a simple gold band on her right hand. She had moved it from her left hand 3 months ago. Her hair, once a vibrant chestnut, was now streaked with gray and pulled back into a severe, practical bun. She sat with her hands folded in her lap, staring at the empty judge's bench. Beside her was her attorney, Beatrice Halloway. Beatrice was a stark contrast to the slick, aggressive Arthur Pendleton. She was a heavy-set woman in her 60s, with frizzy hair, reading glasses on a chain, and a tote bag that looked like it contained knitting rather than legal briefs. "Look at them," Silas muttered to Arthur, gesturing with his chin. "Sad, really. Beatrice Halloway? Where did she find her? The yellow pages from 1990? I almost feel bad, Arthur. Should we offer them an extra $1 million just to spare the embarrassment?" "Stick to the plan, Silas," Arthur warned, though a smirk played on his lips. "We offer the settlement $10 million, the terrifyingly small condo in Jersey, and she keeps the dog. In exchange, she waives all rights to Sterling Dynamics and dissolves the marriage immediately." "10 million, Silas mused. "I made that before breakfast last Tuesday. And that's why you're the genius, and she's the history." Tiffany giggled, leaning in to kiss his cheek, leaving a smudge of bright pink lipstick. The bailiff's voice cut through the murmurs. "All rise, the Honorable Judge Harrison Blackwood presiding." The room shuffled to its feet. Judge Blackwood swept in. He was a terrifying man with eyebrows like thunderclouds and a reputation for shredding arrogant lawyers. He took his seat, adjusted his spectacles, and glared at Tiffany's hat. "Miss Dubois, is it?" the judge asked, his voice like gravel. Tiffany beamed, waving slightly. "Hi, Judge. This is a courtroom, not the Kentucky Derby. If that hat blocks the view of the bailiff, I will have it confiscated." Silas chuckled as Tiffany pouted, removing the hat. "Feisty old coot," Silas whispered. "Case number 49204, the clerk announced. Sterling versus Sterling. Petition for divorce and division of assets. "Ready for the petitioner, Your Honor," Arthur Pendleton announced smoothly, standing up and buttoning his jacket. "Ready for the respondent, Your Honor," Beatrice Halloway said. Her voice was soft, almost grandmotherly. She didn't stand up with a flourish. She just leaned forward slightly. Silas leaned over to Tiffany. "Watch this. The Mako is about to eat the goldfish." Arthur Pendleton began his opening statement with the theatricality of a Shakespearean villain. He paced the floor, gesturing broadly. "Your Honor, we are here today to formalize the end of a union that, quite frankly, ended decades ago in spirit. My client, Mr. Silas Sterling, is a titan of industry. He is the face, the brain, and the brawn behind Sterling Dynamics, a company that has revolutionized aerospace engineering. He has worked 80-hour weeks, traveled the globe, and built an empire from scratch." Arthur paused for effect, walking over to stand directly in front of Eleanor. She didn't flinch. She didn't even look up. "Meanwhile," Arthur continued, his voice dripping with condescension, "Mrs. Sterling has enjoyed the fruits of this labor. She has lived in luxury, managed the household, and existed. We do not deny her role as a supportive spouse in the early years. However, the assets in question, specifically the ownership of Sterling Dynamics, are solely the result of Mr. Sterling's genius. Mrs. Sterling has no background in engineering. She has no business degree. She has spent the last 20 years gardening and attending charity luncheons." Silas nodded vigorously from his seat. "Gardening," he thought. "That's all she ever did. While I was closing deals in Tokyo, she was pruning roses. Therefore," Arthur concluded, "we propose that the prenuptial agreement, signed 30 years ago, be upheld. While the original physical copy was, unfortunately, lost in a flood at the firm's archives, we have a sworn affidavit regarding its contents. A lump sum payment, separation of business assets. Mr. Sterling retains 100% of the company." Judge Blackwood peered over his glasses. "You lost the prenup, Mr. Pendleton?" "A clerical error from a defunct storage facility, Your Honor, but Mr. Sterling's memory is clear." "I see," the judge said, his face unreadable. He turned to Beatrice Halloway. "Miss Halloway, does the respondent have an opening statement?" Beatrice stood up slowly. She smoothed the front of her skirt. She looked at Silas, her eyes sharp and intelligent behind the thick lenses. "Your Honor," Beatrice began, her voice gaining a surprising steeliness, "we do not dispute that Mr. Sterling works long hours. We do not dispute that he enjoys traveling the globe," she glanced briefly at Tiffany, "or that he enjoys the company of assistants." Tiffany gasped. Silas turned red. "However," Beatrice continued, "we strongly dispute the narrative of the self-made man. History, Your Honor, is often written by the loudest person in the room, but in a court of law, we prefer it to be written in ink." Silas rolled his eyes. "Here comes the sob story," he thought. "She sacrificed her youth, blah blah blah. Mr. Pendleton speaks of Sterling Dynamics, as if it sprang fully formed from Mr. Sterling's forehead, like Athena from Zeus," Beatrice said. "But 30 years ago, Silas Sterling was a college dropout with a gambling debt and a charisma that far exceeded his credit score." Silas sat up straighter. "Objection," he hissed at Arthur. "She can't bring up the Atlantic City incident." "Shh," Arthur waved him off. 30 years ago," Beatrice said, walking over to her messy table and picking up a stack of yellowed papers, "Eleanor Beaumont, as she was known then, was a graduate of MIT with a degree in propulsion physics. She had an inheritance from her grandfather. Mr. Sterling had an idea, a sketch on a napkin, and he had no money to build it." Silas felt a prickle of irritation. He hated being reminded of the early days. He hated remembering the tiny apartment in Queens, the way he had to beg Eleanor to liquidate her trust fund to buy the first prototype parts. But that was ancient history. He had paid her back 1,000 times over in diamonds and furs. "We are not asking for a settlement, Your Honor," Beatrice said, dropping the bombshell with a casual tone that made it even more devastating. "We are not asking for $10 million. We are not asking for the beach house." Silas frowned. "What is she doing? Is she crazy?" "We are asking," Beatrice said, looking directly at Silas, "for the enforcement of the original Articles of Incorporation." "Articles of Incorporation?" Judge Blackwood asked, intrigued. "I thought this was a divorce hearing, Miss Halloway." "It is, Your Honor. But in order to divide the assets, we must establish whose assets they actually are. Mr. Sterling believes he is the owner of Sterling Dynamics. He has certainly acted like it. He walks into the boardroom, he signs the press releases, he takes the credit." Beatrice walked to the witness stand and placed a thick, leather-bound binder on the ledge. "But if the court will indulge me, I would like to call my first and only witness, not Mrs. Sterling, but Mr. Silas Sterling." Silas smirked. "Perfect," he thought. "I'll charm the judge, humiliate this librarian of a lawyer, and be at lunch by 1. He stood up, buttoning his jacket again. He winked at Tiffany. "Watch the master work," he whispered. He strode to the stand, placed his hand on the Bible, and swore to tell the truth. He sat down, crossing his legs, looking like he was posing for the cover of Forbes. "Mr. Sterling," Beatrice said, approaching the stand. She didn't look intimidated. She looked amused. "You are the CEO of Sterling Dynamics?" "Founder and CEO, yes," Silas corrected, projecting his voice. "And you built this company from nothing?" "I did. Blood, sweat, and tears." "And your wife? What was her role?" Silas chuckled, a condescending sound that grated on the ears. "Eleanor? She's a wonderful woman, really. Great at hosting dinner parties. But business? No, she doesn't have the head for it. She's soft, risk-averse. I tried to explain the quarterly reports to her once, and she fell asleep." Tiffany giggled from the back. The judge banged his gavel. Silence in the gallery. "So," Beatrice continued, "she has no ownership stake?" "None," Silas said firmly. "Like my lawyer said, the prenup kept everything separate. The company is mine, always has been." Beatrice nodded slowly. She reached into her tote bag. The tension in the room shifted. It wasn't the frenetic energy of Silas. It was the heavy, suffocating pressure of a trap snapping shut. "Mr. Sterling, you mentioned the prenup was lost." "A tragedy," Silas said insincerely. "Yes. However," Beatrice pulled out a document encased in a plastic sleeve. It was old. The edges were fraying. "Mrs. Sterling is very organized. She keeps everything, including the document you signed on October 14th, 1995, the day Sterling Dynamics was officially registered." Silas squinted. He didn't remember signing anything special that day, other than the standard forms. "I'd like to enter this into evidence as Exhibit A," Beatrice said, handing it to the bailiff, who handed it to the judge. Judge Blackwood opened the file. He adjusted his glasses. He read the first page. Then he stopped. He looked up at Silas, then back at the paper. He turned the page. His eyebrows rose higher than they had all morning. "Mr. Sterling," the judge said, his voice dropping an octave, "are you aware of the content of this document?" "It's probably just standard incorporation papers, Your Honor. I'm listed as the president." "You are listed as the appointed president," the judge corrected. "Reporting to the board is me," Silas laughed. "I'm the chairman, not according to this," Beatrice cut in. "Mr. Sterling, would you please read paragraph 4, subsection C, out loud for the court?" The bailiff handed the document to Silas. Silas took it with a scoff. He held it at arm's length. "The ownership of the entity known as Sterling Dynamics." Silas started reading, his voice strong. Then he paused. He blinked. He read the next line silently. His face went from tan to a pale, sickly gray. "Read it, Mr. Sterling," Judge Blackwood commanded. Silas swallowed. His throat clicked. The ownership is held in the Eleanor Vance Trust, of which Eleanor Vance, now Sterling, is the sole beneficiary and trustee. The position of CEO is a contract role, subject to renewal or termination by the trustee at any time. The silence in the courtroom was absolute. You could hear the hum of the air conditioning. You could hear Tiffany chewing her gum. "Keep reading," Beatrice said softly. "The part about the intellectual property." Silas's hands started to shake. All patents, designs, and future intellectual property developed under the banner of Sterling Dynamics remain the sole property of the founder, Eleanor Vance. Silas looked up, his eyes wild. He looked at Arthur, who was frantically shuffling through his own papers, looking terrified. He looked at Tiffany, who was applying lip gloss, unaware that her meal ticket had just bounced. Then, for the first time in 20 years, Silas Sterling actually looked at his wife. Eleanor hadn't moved. She was still sitting, with her hands folded, but she was looking at him now, and in her eyes, there was no anger, there was no sadness, there was just a cold, absolute finality. That's a forgery," Silas stammered. "This is a trick?" "It is notarized," Beatrice said. "And look at the signature at the bottom, Mr. Sterling. Is that not your signature?" Silas looked. It was his signature. The flamboyant loops, the aggressive slash of the says. He remembered now. He remembered that night. He had been so desperate for her money to start the company, so sure that he could just talk her into changing it later, or that she would never actually exercise control. He had signed it because he thought she was weak. He thought she was just a stepping stone. "Mr. Sterling," Judge Blackwood said, his voice booming like a gavel strike, "it appears you have strutted into my courtroom, claiming to own an empire that belongs to the woman you are trying to discard with a pittance." "Wait." Silas stood up, knocking the chair back. "She's a housewife. She can't run a billion-dollar company. The stock will tank. The investors will revolt." "Actually," Beatrice interrupted, "Mrs. Sterling has been writing the quarterly strategy reports for the last 15 years. You know, the ones you claimed she fell asleep listening to? She wrote them. You just signed them." A collective gasp went through the courtroom. Silas felt the room spinning. The arrogance was leaking out of him like air from a punctured tire. "We are not asking for half, Your Honor," Beatrice said, turning back to the judge. "Since Mr. Sterling wishes to divorce, Mrs. Sterling is happy to grant it, but she will be retaining her assets, all of them, including the company, and as the trustee, she has a motion regarding Mr. Sterling's employment." Silas gripped the railing of the witness stand. "You can't do this to me," he whispered. "I am Silas Sterling." Eleanor finally spoke. Her voice was quiet, raspy from disuse, but clear as a bell. "You are Silas Sterling," she said, "but the company is mine." The silence in Judge Blackwood's courtroom was broken only by the frantic scratching of the court reporter's stylus. She was typing faster than she ever had in her life. Terrified of missing a single syllable of the implosion of Silas Sterling, Silas stood frozen in the witness box. He looked like a man who had walked off a cliff and hadn't yet realized gravity was about to kick in. He turned his desperate gaze toward Arthur Pendleton. "Arthur," he croaked, "fix this. Tell him about the verbal agreements. Tell him about the precedent of implied ownership." Arthur Pendleton, the shark, the Mako, was slowly packing his briefcase. He didn't look up. "Silas," Arthur said, his voice devoid of its usual bluster, "there is no precedent that overrides a notarized, signed, and incorporated founding charter. You appointed her trustee, you made her the owner, you work for her." "I pay your retainer," Silas roared, slamming his hand on the railing. "You work for me." Arthur finally looked up. His eyes were cold. "Actually, the checks come from the Sterling Dynamics corporate account, which, if I understand Miss Halloway correctly, is now under the direct control of Mrs. Sterling. So, technically," Arthur glanced at Eleanor, offering a weak, ingratiating smile, "I believe I am currently working pro bono until Mrs. Sterling authorizes my billable hours, which, given my opening statement, seems unlikely." Eleanor didn't smile back. She simply nodded to the judge. Your Honor, as the majority shareholder and owner, I am accepting Mr. Sterling's resignation effective immediately. We will, of course, provide a severance package consistent with his years of service, provided he returns all company property before leaving the building. Resignation? Silas sputtered. I didn't resign. I am the face of the company. The stock will plummet without me. Judge Blackwood leaned forward, interlacing his fingers. Mr. Sterling, you are currently shouting at the owner of your employer in a court of law. I suggest you lower your voice before I hold you in contempt. As for the division of assets, the judge looked over his glasses at the papers. Since the marital home, the Hamptons estate, and the Aspen Lodge are all held by the corporation for liability purposes, a strategy I believe you insisted on to avoid taxes, they remain property of Sterling Dynamics. Silas felt the blood drain from his face. He remembered the meeting with his tax accountants 5 years ago. Put it all in the company name, he had said. Write off the maintenance. Make it tax deductible. It was brilliant then. It was a death sentence now. So, Silas whispered, what do I get? You possess your personal savings account, Beatrice Halloway. Read from a list, which contains approximately $250,000, and your 2022 Porsche 911, which is in your name. However, there is an outstanding lien on the vehicle. 200,000? Silas shrieked. I spend that on wine. Where is my salary? My bonuses? Spent, Eleanor said. Her voice cut through his panic like a knife. You spent it, Silas. On trips. On gambling. On her. She didn't look at Tiffany, but the implication hung heavy in the air. I reinvested my dividends. You liquidated your paycheck every month to fund your lifestyle. You have nothing because you kept nothing. Judge Blackwood banged his gavel. The court rules in favor of the respondent, Eleanor Sterling. The prenup is invalid due to the superseding corporate charter. The assets remain with the corporation. Divorce is granted. Court is adjourned. The bang of the gavel sounded like a gunshot. Silas stood there, trembling. He looked at the gallery. The few reporters who had drifted in for a boring billionaire divorce were now frantically texting on their phones. This wasn't a divorce. It was a corporate coup. Silas stumbled off the stand. He walked toward Eleanor. Elle, he said, his voice cracking. He tried to summon the charm that had worked on her in college, the crooked smile that usually melted her resolve. Elle, honey, let's not be hasty. We can talk about this. I got carried away, but we're a team, right? Sterling and Sterling? Eleanor stood up. She picked up her tote bag. For a second, Silas thought she might hug him. Instead, she reached into her bag and pulled out a sleek, black security badge. My badge? Silas asked. Deactivated, Eleanor said. Security has been notified. Do not try to enter the building, Silas. You'll be escorted off the premises. It would be embarrassing for you. But, the gala next week, Silas stammered. The unveiling of the X-14 turbine. I have to give the speech. I canceled the speech, Eleanor said calmly. The X-14 isn't ready. The fuel intake manifold overheats at 30,000 feet. I told you that 3 months ago, but you were too busy booking a suite in Cabo to listen to the engineering reports. Silas's jaw dropped. You know about the manifold? I redesigned the manifold, Silas. Last night, while you were at the club. Eleanor turned to Beatrice. Ready, Beatrice? Ready, Mrs. Sterling. Eleanor walked past him. She didn't brush his arm. She didn't look back. She walked out of the courtroom with the steady, rhythmic click of her sensible heels, leaving a vacuum of power that Silas could physically feel sucking the air out of his lungs. The walk from the courtroom to the front steps of the courthouse felt like a funeral march, except the corpse was walking and wearing a $6,000 suit. Silas pushed through the heavy doors, squinting into the sunlight. Tiffany was trailing behind him, struggling to keep up in her Louboutins. She had been uncharacteristically quiet since the gavel fell. Babe? Tiffany asked, grabbing his arm as they reached the top of the concrete stairs. What just happened? What did the judge mean about the house? We're still going to the Hamptons this weekend, right? I already posted about it. Silas whipped around, his face flushed with a mixture of rage and humiliation. Not now, Tiffany. Don't yell at me, she snapped, her voice losing its baby doll sweetness. I didn't lose the company. You did. You told me you were the king of New York. I am the king of New York, Silas lied, trying to straighten his tie, though his hands were shaking. This is just a legal hiccup, a maneuver. It's chess, Tiffany. She thinks she's won a pawn, but I'm going to take the queen. I'll appeal, I'll sue. I'll bury her in paperwork. He scanned the street. Usually, his driver, Big Mike, would be double-parked right in front, the back door, of the black Mercedes Maybach, open and waiting. The Maybach was there. Big Mike was leaning against the hood, arms crossed over his massive chest. He was wearing his driver's cap and sunglasses. Thank God, Silas muttered. Come on, we need to get to the club. I need a drink and a phone. Silas marched down the stairs, Tiffany clicking behind him. He reached the car and grabbed the handle of the rear door. It was locked. Silas frowned. He pulled again. Locked. He rapped on the window. Mike, open the door. Let's go. Big Mike didn't move. He slowly took off his sunglasses. He looked at Silas with an expression of pure, unadulterated indifference. Unlock the door, Mike, Silas barked. Are you deaf? Can't do that, Mr. Sterling, Mike rumbled. His voice was deep, like a subterranean train. What do you mean you can't? You work for me. Correction, Mike said, pulling a smartphone out of his pocket and checking a message. I work for Sterling Dynamics, Transportation Division. He turned the screen toward Silas. It was a text message. Sender, Mrs. Sterling, boss. Message, asset #40 Maybach, to be returned to garage immediately. Unauthorized passengers, Silas Sterling, Tiffany Dubois. Do not transport. She texted you? Silas gasped. She called me 10 minutes ago, Mike said. He put the sunglasses back on. Mrs. Sterling is a nice lady. She remembers my daughter's birthday. Sent her a laptop for college. You? You've never even asked my last name. I'll give you $1,000 cash right now to drive us to Fifth Avenue, Silas said, patting his pockets. He froze. His wallet was in his other jacket, the one currently hanging in the CEO suite he was barred from. Mike smirked. Looks like you're light, Silas. Besides, I value my pension. At that moment, the doors of the courthouse opened again. Eleanor emerged, flanked by Beatrice. Big Mike immediately straightened up. He walked around the car, opened the back door with a flourish, and bowed slightly. Mrs. Sterling, Mike said warmly. Ready to head to the office? Eleanor paused on the stairs. She looked down at Silas, who was standing on the curb like a jilted teenager. Then she looked at the car. Thank you, Mike, Eleanor said. She descended the stairs with grace. Silas stepped in her path. Eleanor, don't do this. Not in front of the staff. Let me get a ride at least. It's humiliating. Eleanor looked at him, confused. Humiliating? Silas, you brought your mistress to our divorce hearing. You tried to leave me with nothing but a condo in Jersey. And you're worried about your humiliation? She stepped around him. She got into the back seat of the Maybach. Beatrice followed. Wait, Tiffany yelled, stepping forward. What about me? I can't take the subway. I'm wearing suede. Eleanor leaned forward as the window rolled up. There's a bus stop on the corner, dear. I hear the M15 is very reliable. The window sealed shut. The Maybach purred to life and pulled away, merging seamlessly into the Manhattan traffic, leaving Silas and Tiffany standing in a cloud of exhaust. Silas coughed, waving his hand. He turned to Tiffany, forcing a smile. Okay. Minor setback. We'll grab a taxi. We'll go to the penthouse. I have cash. In the safe there. Tiffany was looking at her phone. She was scrolling through Twitter. Number billionaire bust is trending, she said flatly. Page 6 just tweeted, Silas Sterling ousted. Wife revealed as secret genius behind tech empire. They have a picture of you looking panicked on the stand. Fake news, Silas waved his hand. Listen, Tiffany, I need you to be strong. We're going to fight this. But I might need to borrow your credit card for the hotel, just for tonight, until I access my offshore accounts. Tiffany slowly lowered her phone. She looked at Silas. Really looked at him. She saw the wrinkles around his eyes that the expensive facials couldn't hide. She saw the slight paunch beneath the tailored suit. She saw a 58-year-old man with no job, no car, and apparently no money. Without the aura of billions, Silas Sterling wasn't a titan. He was just old. My credit card? Tiffany laughed. It was a harsh, ugly sound. Silas, my credit card has a limit of 5,000. That won't even cover the champagne you drink at dinner. We'll budget. We'll make it work, Silas pleaded, reaching for her hand. Tiffany recoiled as if he were radioactive. Budget? Budget? Silas, I didn't sign up for a budget. I didn't sign up for supporting you through a hard time. I signed up for the beach house and the black card. But I thought you loved me, Silas said, and for the first time, he sounded genuinely pathetic. You said I was your soulmate. I loved the lifestyle, Silas, Tiffany spat. She flagged down a yellow cab that was passing by. And frankly, without the billions, you're kind of exhausting. The cab screeched to a halt. Tiffany opened the door. Where are you going? Silas cried. I'm going to Vance's party, she said, sliding into the cab. Vance was Silas's biggest competitor in the aerospace industry, a man Silas hated with a passion. I hear he just got a government contract, and he's single. Tiffany, you can't. Watch me, she said. She slammed the door. The taxi sped off. Silas Sterling stood alone on the curb of the Manhattan family court. The wind picked up, blowing a discarded newspaper against his leg. He reached down and peeled it off. It was the financial section. His face was on the cover from a week ago, under the headline, Untouchable. He looked around. No driver, no mistress, no lawyer, no wife. He checked his pockets. He had a gold money clip with no cash, a packet of mints, and a phone with 12% battery. He sat down on the dirty steps of the courthouse and put his head in his hands. But the universe wasn't done with him yet. His phone buzzed. He looked at the screen. It was a notification from his bank. Alert. Automatic payment for penthouse mortgage failed. Insufficient funds. Please contact your branch immediately. Silas laughed. It was a manic, broken sound. He looked up at the sky. Well, he whispered to no one, I guess I'm walking. Silas Sterling did not walk to the headquarters of Sterling Dynamics. He stormed there, fueled by an adrenaline cocktail of panic and delusion. The 40-block walk had blistered his heels inside the Italian leather loafers, and the wind had whipped his silver hair into a frenzy. But in his mind, he was still the emperor, returning to quell a rebellion. He stood before the glass and steel monolith that was the Sterling building. It pierced the Manhattan skyline, a testament to his ego. He looked at the revolving doors. My doors, he thought. My building. My name is right there in 10-foot chrome letters. He pushed through the doors, expecting the usual flurry of activity. Receptionists straightening up, junior executives nodding respectfully. Instead, the lobby was quiet. Too quiet. He marched toward the security turnstiles. Sitting behind the desk was a man Silas had passed every day for 12 years. Silas knew him as the guard. He had never bothered to learn his name. Open the gate, Silas commanded, not breaking stride. The guard, a burly man named Dennis with a thick neck and a thicker patience, didn't move to press the buzzer. He looked up from his monitor. I need an ID, sir, Dennis said flatly. Silas stopped. He laughed, a short, sharp bark. Funny, very funny. It's me, Silas. Open the gate. I'm late for the board meeting. Mr. Sterling, Dennis said, his voice polite but firm. I have a memo here from the CEO's office. All previous credentials for Silas Sterling have been revoked. You are on the Do Not Admit list. Do not admit? Silas slammed his hand on the marble desk. I built this desk. I pay your salary. Open this gate, or you're fired. You hear me? Fired. Dennis stood up. He was 6'4". Silas took a half step back. Actually, sir, Dennis said, Mrs. Sterling gave us a raise this morning, retroactive for the last 2 years, and she learned my name. It's Dennis. Now, please leave, or I'll have to call the police. Silas stared at him. The world was upside down. The help was talking back. Fine, Silas spat. I don't need a pass. I'll wait for someone to come out. He retreated to the side, lurking near a potted fern, like a common stalker. 10 minutes passed. Finally, a group of interns exited for lunch. As the glass barrier swung open, Silas lunged. He caught the gate before it closed and slipped through, ignoring Dennis's shout of, "Hey!" Silas ran. He sprinted toward the executive elevators. He jammed his finger on the call button, but it required a key card. Damn it. He looked for the fire stairs. He wrenched the heavy door open and started climbing. The boardroom was on the 40th floor. By the 10th floor, his breath was coming in ragged gasps. By the 20th floor, his legs were burning. By the 30th floor, he had shed his jacket and his tie was undone. By the 40th floor, Silas Sterling was a sweating, heaving mess. He burst through the stairwell door into the executive hallway. It was pristine, silent, carpeted in plush gray wool. He could hear voices coming from the boardroom at the end of the hall. He staggered toward the double oak doors. He didn't knock. He threw them open with both hands. "Stop!" Silas screamed, his voice cracking. The room froze. Around the massive oval table sat the 12 members of the board of directors. These were men and women Silas had wined and dined for decades. He had taken them on his yacht. He had bought them watches. They were his cronies. And at the head of the table, in his chair, sat Eleanor. She wasn't wearing the gray cardigan anymore. She was wearing a sharp, tailored white blazer that made her look like a modern monarch. Her hair was down, cascading over her shoulders. She looked younger, powerful. "Silas," Eleanor said. She didn't sound angry. She sounded disappointed. "You're sweaty. You can't do this." Silas wheezed, stumbling into the room. He pointed a shaking finger at the board members. "Preston, Montgomery, Linda, tell her who runs this company. I made you all rich." Preston, the chairman of the audit committee, cleared his throat. He wouldn't meet Silas's eyes. He was looking at a dossier in front of him. "Actually, Silas," Preston said, adjusting his glasses. "We were just reviewing the financials Eleanor presented. Specifically, the R&D consultation fees you've been paying to a shell company in the Caymans." Silas froze. That's confidential strategy. "It's embezzlement," Linda, the head of HR, said sharply. $3 million last year alone, funneled into an account linked to Tiffany Dubois. "And then there's the matter of the X-14 turbine," Montgomery added. "You told us the prototype was flawless. You projected record profits. Eleanor just showed us the test results. The engine melts at operational temperature. If we had launched next week as you planned, the lawsuits would have bankrupted us." "I was handling it," Silas lied. "I was going to fix it." "How?" Eleanor asked calmly. "You haven't stepped foot in the engineering lab in 6 years, Silas. You didn't even know the lead engineer quit last month." Silas gripped the back of an empty chair. "But the investors, the brand. I am the brand." "No." Eleanor stood up. She picked up a remote and clicked it. The screen behind her lit up. It showed a graph, a stock ticker line shooting straight up. "This is the market reaction since the news broke an hour ago," Eleanor said. "Sterling Dynamics stock is up 12%. Silas blinked. "Up? But I was fired." "Exactly," Preston said. "The market was tired of your volatility, Silas. They were tired of the scandals, the mistresses, the erratic tweets. They know Eleanor. They know she's the one who holds the patents. They see stability. They see competence." "You're a liability, Silas," Linda said, closing her folder. "A relic." Silas looked around the table. He saw no sympathy. He saw only the cold calculation of business. He had taught them well. He had taught them to value profit over everything. And now, he was the bad investment. "Eleanor," Silas pleaded, his voice breaking, "please. I built this place. Don't kick me out. I'll take a consultant role. I'll take a pay cut. I'll sit in the basement. Just don't take my company." Eleanor looked at him. For a moment, her eyes softened. She remembered the man he used to be, the dreamer who sat on the floor of their apartment eating takeout and talking about reaching the stars. "I'm not taking your company, Silas," she said softly. "I'm saving my company from you." She pressed a button on the intercom. "Dennis? He's in the boardroom." 2 seconds later, the doors opened. Dennis, the security guard, walked in, flanked by 2 police officers. "Mr. Sterling," Dennis said, not unkindly. "Time to go." "No," Silas whispered. "No." He tried to grab the table, but his strength was gone. The police officers took him by the arms. They didn't cuff him, but the grip was iron tight. As they dragged him backward out of the room, Silas kept his eyes on Eleanor. She didn't look away. She watched him go, a silent witness to his exit. The last thing he saw before the doors closed was Eleanor turning back to the board. "Now," she said, her voice clear and commanding, "let's discuss the new fuel intake manifold. I have some ideas." They escorted him out the back service entrance, depositing him in an alleyway filled with dumpsters. It was a final indignity. The king of aerospace, thrown out with the recycling. Silas stumbled out onto the street. It was late afternoon now. The shadows were long and cold. He was in Midtown, surrounded by the rush hour crush. Thousands of people were streaming past him, faces glued to phones, intent on getting home. Home. The word echoed in Silas's mind. Where is home? He patted his pockets again. No wallet, no phone. He had dropped it in the stairwell during his climb. He had nothing but the clothes on his back. A bespoke suit stained with sweat, a shirt with a torn collar, and shoes that were currently shredding his feet. He started walking north. Instinct took over. He would go to the penthouse on Park Avenue. Maybe Tiffany was there. Maybe she had cooled off. Maybe the doorman, Henri, would let him in. Henri liked him. He tipped Henri at Christmas. The walk was a nightmare. Without the insulation of a limousine, New York City was a sensory assault. The noise of honking taxis was deafening. The smell of exhaust and garbage made him nauseous. People bumped into him, cursing him for walking too slow. "Watch it, Grandpa." A teenager on a skateboard yelled, swerving around him. "Grandpa," Silas thought. "I'm 58. I'm in my prime." But he caught his reflection in a shop window. He didn't look like a titan. He looked like a madman. His hair was wild, his eyes bloodshot, his face gray with exhaustion. He reached the penthouse building an hour later. It was a limestone fortress of exclusivity. He walked up to the gold-trimmed doors. Henri was there, standing guard in his uniform. "Henri," Silas gasped, leaning against a pillar. "Thank God. Let me in. I need a drink." Henri didn't open the door. He stood behind the glass, arms crossed. He looked at Silas with a mixture of pity and duty. He shook his head slowly. "Henri!" Silas shouted, banging on the glass. "It's me, Mr. Sterling. Open the damn door." Henri pointed to a small keypad on the wall. He held up a finger, tapped his ear, and shook his head again. Orders. Silas realized the locks had been changed. The codes were wiped. He was locked out of his own life. He slumped against the building. He was thirsty. So incredibly thirsty. He saw a hot dog cart on the corner. The smell of salty pretzels wafted over. His stomach roared. He hadn't eaten since breakfast, a breakfast of caviar and eggs Benedict that felt like a lifetime ago. He walked over to the cart. "Water," he rasped. "Give me a water." The vendor, a gruff man in a beanie, held out a cold bottle. $3. Silas reached into his pocket. He pulled out the lint, the mint wrapper. I don't have cash," Silas said, "but I'm Silas Sterling. You know me. I'll pay you back. I'll send you a check for $1,000. Just give me the water." The vendor looked him up and down. He saw the expensive suit, yes, but he also saw the desperation. In New York, crazy people wore expensive suits all the time. "No cash, no water," the vendor said, putting the bottle back in the ice. "Move along, buddy. You're scaring the customers." "I own a skyscraper," Silas screamed. "I could buy your whole family." "Yeah, and I'm the Queen of England. Beat it." Silas stumbled away, his throat parched. He kept walking. He didn't know where else to go. Night began to fall. The temperature dropped. Silas shivered in his suit. He found himself walking toward Central Park. It was darker there, quieter. He sat down on a bench near the duck pond. His feet were throbbing so badly, he had to take his shoes off. His socks were soaked in blood. He looked at the water. It was black and still. "Well, Silas," he said to the darkness, "you wanted freedom? You wanted to be a bachelor again." He laughed, but it turned into a sob. A figure approached the bench. Silas stiffened. He was in no condition to fight off a mugger. It was a woman pushing a shopping cart filled with bags. She was wearing layers of mismatched coats. She stopped in front of him. She looked at his shoes, then at his face. "Rough night?" she asked. Her voice was raspy, like rusty hinges. "You could say that," Silas muttered. "I lost everything. In one day." The woman nodded sagely. She reached into her cart and pulled out a half-eaten sandwich wrapped in foil. "My husband left me too," she said. "Took the house. Took the kids. Said I was crazy." She held out the sandwich. "It's tuna. Not bad." Silas looked at the sandwich. His stomach cramped with hunger. A day ago, he would have fired a waiter for serving him tuna that wasn't seared ahi. Now, he looked at this homeless woman, offering him half her dinner. I can't," Silas said, his pride flaring one last time. "Suit yourself," she shrugged. She put it back. Then she reached into another bag and pulled out a newspaper. "You want something to read? Keep your mind off the cold?" She tossed the paper onto his lap and pushed her cart away into the gloom. Silas picked up the paper. It was the evening edition of the New York Post. The headline screamed in bold black letters, "The Empress Strikes Back." Underneath was a photo of Eleanor leaving the courthouse. She looked strong, dignified, and below that, a smaller photo. It was Tiffany. She was hanging on the arm of a man with a comb-over and a bad spray tan. The caption read, "Tiffany Dubois spotted entering Club Vortex with rival CEO Richard Vance. Sources say engagement rumors are already swirling." Silas stared at the page. Vance, his enemy. Tiffany hadn't just left him. She had defected to the competition within hours. He crumpled the newspaper in his fist. He looked up at the skyline, glittering with lights. Somewhere in one of those penthouses, people were drinking champagne. Somewhere, Eleanor was probably sitting in her library, drinking tea, finally at peace. And here sat Silas Sterling, the man who thought he was the sun, realizing he was just a moth who had flown too close to the flame. He lay down on the hard wooden bench, pulled his suit jacket tight around him, and closed his eyes. For the first time in 30 years, Silas Sterling cried, not for his money, not for his company, but because he realized, with terrifying clarity, that nobody was coming to look for him. 5 years later, the bell above the door of Henderson's Hardware jingled, announcing a customer. "Be right with you," a voice called from the back aisle. Silas emerged from behind a rack of PVC pipes. He was wearing a green apron with a name tag that simply read, Silas. His silver hair was thinner now, cut short and practical. The deep tan was gone, replaced by the pallor of a man who spent his days indoors. He wore reading glasses on a chain around his neck, the kind he used to mock Beatrice Halloway for wearing. He wasn't carrying a briefcase. He was carrying a pricing gun. "Can I help you find something?" Silas asked the customer, a young man looking confusedly at a wall of drill bits. "Yeah, I'm trying to fix a shelf for my girlfriend," the man said. "I don't know the difference between masonry bits and wood bits." Silas smiled. It wasn't the shark-like grin of the billionaire Silas Sterling. It was a genuine, tired smile. "Well, if it's drywall, you don't want masonry. You'll tear the wall apart. Here, grab these, and use a wall anchor. You don't want the shelf falling on her head. Trust me, keeping the woman in your life happy is worth the extra $2. The young man laughed. "Thanks, man. You really know your stuff." "I've learned a few things the hard way," Silas said softly. He rang up the customer total sale, $14.50, and watched him leave. Silas went back to stocking the shelves. This was his life now. He lived in a studio apartment above the hardware store in a small town in Ohio. He didn't have a car. He walked to work. He didn't have a portfolio. He had a savings jar in his kitchen cabinet. After the long walk home 5 years ago, Silas had hit rock bottom. He had spent a month in a shelter before realizing that no one was coming to save him. The friends, the network, the mistresses, they had evaporated like mist. Tiffany had married Richard Vance, divorced him 6 months later, and was now starring in a reality show about desperate ex-wives. Silas had been forced to do something he hadn't done since he was 20. Get a job, a real one. No one in New York would hire him. He was a laughingstock. The man who lost $1 billion because he couldn't read a contract. So he fled. He changed his surroundings, he lowered his expectations, and slowly, painfully, he rebuilt himself as a nobody. And strangely, he slept better now than he ever had on 1000 thread count Egyptian cotton. It was lunch break. Silas walked to the break room and turned on the small, fuzzy television that sat on the fridge. He unwrapped a turkey sandwich. The local news ended, and a national business program came on. The anchor's voice was excited. And now, our feature story. The tech CEO of the year. For the third year running, Sterling Dynamics has shattered earnings expectations with their new eco-propulsion system. We sat down with the woman who started it all, Eleanor Sterling. Silas froze. He stopped chewing. On the screen, Eleanor appeared. She looked magnificent. She had let her gray hair shine through completely now, a silver crown that commanded respect. She was sitting in the office, his old office, but it looked different. The pretentious modern art was gone, replaced by blueprints and models of engines. Mrs. Sterling, the interviewer asked, critics said the company would collapse after the tumultuous restructuring 5 years ago. How did you turn it around? Eleanor smiled. It was the smile Silas used to fall in love with before he decided he loved money more. I didn't turn it around, she said. I just stopped letting the noise drown out the work. We focused on the engineering. We treated our people well. And we stopped trying to be celebrities and started trying to be problem solvers. And what about your personal life? The interviewer pressed. Any regrets about the past? Silas leaned in, his heart hammering against his ribs. Eleanor looked down for a moment, then back at the camera. I regret that I stayed in the shadows for so long. I regret that I let someone else convince me I was small so they could feel big. But I don't regret the ending. Sometimes, you have to burn the house down to see the sunrise. Silas stared at the screen. She didn't mention his name. She didn't insult him. To her, he wasn't a monster anymore. He was just a lesson she had learned. The segment ended. Silas turned off the TV. The door chimes jingled again. Silas! It was Mr. Henderson, the owner. Truck's here. I need help unloading the cement bags. Silas looked at the blank TV screen one last time. In his old life, he would have fired Henderson for daring to ask him to lift a finger. He would have thrown a tantrum. He would have called a lawyer. Silas stood up. He crumpled his sandwich wrapper and tossed it in the trash. He adjusted his apron. Coming, boss, Silas called out. He walked out to the loading dock, into the cold air. He grabbed a 50-pound bag of cement and hoisted it onto his shoulder. It was heavy. It hurt his back. But as he walked it into the store, Silas Sterling realized something. He was carrying his own weight. Finally. So, what is the lesson of Silas Sterling? It's not just that cheaters never prosper because sometimes they do, for a while. The real lesson is about the danger of underestimating the quiet people in your life. Silas thought Eleanor was weak because she was silent. He mistook her patience for stupidity and her loyalty for submission. He forgot that the person who builds the foundation is the only one who knows how to pull the pin and bring the whole structure down. In the end, Silas lost his fortune, but he gained his humanity. He learned that respect isn't something you buy with a black card. It's something you earn, bag of cement by bag of cement. And Eleanor? She proved that you don't need to shout to be heard. You just need to own the paper the loudmouth is standing on. If you enjoyed this story of karma, betrayal, and justice served cold, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. Do you think Eleanor was too harsh? Or did Silas get exactly what he deserved? Let me know in the comments below. And if you want more dramatic stories about billionaires getting a reality check, make sure to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss an upload. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.